it was in stages of development or years old.
So,
And it's
you know
phenomenal
what?
because that ties into what scientists have been saying.
You guys know each other. You can continue, and I'd like to
We're
begin.
out. I'm sorry. We're here for mission.
No problem. Also, I'd say we are also observing the yahrzeit of Naomi's great grandmother, since there is no one left from the generation previous. Her mother's no longer with us. Obviously, her grandmother's no longer with us. So these yahrzeits now fall to us.
My
So
mother's
we're observing that yahrzeit to get her name. I think
my
she was
mother's yahrzeit.
Miriam Bas. I forgot the first name. Halevi. So this is her yahrzeit, and she's a few days separate from our husband, whose yahrzeit will be commemorating next week, and we will be giving tikkun le'ilui nishmasam on Shabbos. Okay, with those pieces of business out of the way,
I'd like
let
to
me
add
tell
one
you
more
what I
thing.
intend to do.
Eli, I have another illness. My mother's yahrzeit was today, and that's Rivka Bas Yaakov.
Her neshama should have an aliyah. All the holy neshama should have aliyahs. What I'm going to do, and I wrote it out to make sure I'm concise. Let's keep track. We have 3 parakim on one subject. A lot, as I say, a lot of ink. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is what we did in parakim 26, 27, Chavav, Chazayim. So, and they're all about Tsar. Tsar is Tyre, Tsar is Phoenicia. So in Perek Chavav, we surmise that this nation, sometimes our trading partner, sometimes our detractor, who gloated when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, is going to be destroyed by wave upon wave of attack. It's pretty fitting because they were they were an island, so to speak, and that they should be waves as a metaphor for the way they'll be attacked. That means nation upon nation. And we talked the first week about who the nations are, and if the nevuah about they'd be totally destroyed is accurate, is that a biblical fallacy? We dealt with that stuff. Now, the harshness of the punishment can be attributable to the fact they gloated, or as I read in Tova Ganzel's fine book, and also Rabbi Trump alluded to, that Izebel was the wife of Yerovim ben Nevat, Chote Umachti b'Yisrael. Izebel was a Phoenician princess, and she was a Phoenician princess who brought Baal worship to Eretz Yisrael. That's a big thing. And we talked about their destruction.
What does that big thing mean?
Which big thing?
She was
She brought Baal worship.
Right. Yeah. So you're going to destroy Tyre because the queen brought Baal worship to Israel. Okay.
I'm not going to destroy it. God did.
But he doesn't say that here at all. Plus, is that a reason to destroy a country because the queen brought Baal worship to a country? All right.
Don't like it?
No.
Don't smoke it. Whatever.
Okay.
All good. I just read it as I sees it, and it's not only my opinion, it's the opinion of a Talmud Chacham and a scholar who mention these things, and that's where I take my information from.
Brian,
I'm very rarely an original thinker.
Brian,
Okay.
Moshe is asking for the link. He sent,
Mo-
Moshe just sent a text to
Okay.
our group.
Let
Give
me
him the link.
send him the link.
Yep.
Okay. Let me send it. 8.
9-3.
Got it. I just sent it to him.
Got it.
So let's see if Moshe can get on now.
So do we have to stand up when a rabbi comes in?
Now, it's really interesting. I don't know if Moshe is a rabbi. I know he's a doctor. He may be a rabbi as well.
That's a good question. If you're on Zoom, do you have to? Or any rabbi that's on?
Well,
But if I
Brian
stand up,
Brian
you'll see my
can't.
lower
I
half.
know. I know. That's
Right.
What? Brian can't what?
Stands up.
Well, he's not
I
wearing.
can't. we're joking, you know, because I can't stand up because I'm not wearing anything beneath my beneath
But
the
I
top.
just
It's
asked.
not good. Let me see if Mike was able to get on. We did start, and Mike just asked me for the link again, which I did send to him. And let me call him up and see Mike Shager. Let me call.
One ringy dingy.
Two ringy thing.
Mike?
Richard, you're
Hi,
bad.
Mike. Hi, Baruch Hashem. Did you get the link?
Hey, you get to know me a little bit.
Is that's a link for Zoom? That's like the passcode? Is that it?
No, that's the link for Zoom. The passcode is the word Navi, N-A-V-I, no caps.
All right. So I have Zoom on my computer. N-A-V-I. No. Okay. Are you in the middle already?
It's okay. Don't worry about it. Get on and we'll welcome you.
N-A-V-I. Okay. Let me try to log on.
Okay,
Thanks.
sure thing. Bye. We're waiting because we're very patient people. My friends like to joke and kibitz. It's no problem. I recorded all of our kibitzing. It's great. Let's see if Mike could get on.
Yeah, I actually was in Shiur this morning. I caught a Siyum right
Uh-huh.
after davening.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I could have seen him in our online see him.
What?
We completed.
We had an online Siyum. I had my chocolate mint liqueur.
I don't see him getting on. I'm going to. Okay, I'm going to continue what I said. Okay.
Yes. Excuse me.
The first parak, as we said, dealt with the reason why Tsar, who is little spoken of, is treated so harshly. In the second parak that we did last week, Tsar is compared to the ultimate luxury container ship, made of the finest materials, laden with goods from a vast, geographically widespread network of trade partners. I did a count last week and I showed you color-coded that there were 35 trade partners on the map and 45 products or categories of products it traded in, which could have numbered in the hundreds, if not the thousands. Said every type of precious stone. How many precious stones are there? So it's enormous. The entire region depended upon them and mourned them in shock as the ship, now remember, Tsar Tires purported to be the inventors of the sea vessel. And this thing sinks to the ocean like a stone. Cargo sinks to the ground. And the same reaction that we see in Umos Ha'olam when they see the destruction, Havdil Elf Havos, the Sharik, which means they whistled like, are you kidding me? This is what happened to them? Okay, Moshe is entering the room. Okay, see? Okay.
Avraham is Maish.
Yeah.
Every Abraham Moshe.
Okay, Moshe. Moshe is muted and you don't have to be.
I
Hi.
am on board.
You're unmuted.
I am on
everybody-
board.
Let me introduce you guys. I don't know if you have a gallery view. Everyone's name is on here. David Cohen, my good friend since about the second grade. Ted Mudden, my good friend for about, I don't know, for about 35 years. Richard Klinkolitz, a good friend for a long time. Marvin Schenker, my friend who you might know as the executive director of Young Israel. And this is Moshe Yeager, Avraham Moshe Yeager,
Correct.
who is a Maggid Shiur in our shul, whose Shiur I attend, and who was you a Chassan Torah, were you not?
Yes, I was bestowed that honor without requesting it, and I couldn't turn down an aliyah. So
Not in Simchas Torah. So in any event, I'm going to go back one step. Everybody will indulge me for a second and catch you up. there are 3 prakim in Navi Yecheskel that deal with the nation of Tsar. Tsar is known as Tyre, otherwise known as Phoenicia. Perek Chavav deals with the reasons that this nation, very little mentioned, sometimes our trade partner, sometimes our detractor, said, who was gloated over our downfall of the Beis Hamikdash, is going to be destroyed by wave upon wave of attack, nation upon nation. There's Machlokes, who talked about a few weeks ago about, did the Nevuah come true? They'd be utterly destroyed. So there's kindness to be made. Now, it's appropriate because Tsar is an island, wave upon wave, waves, ocean, etc. Now, my good friend David objects to the fact that the harshness of the punishment may be attributable to the fact that Izebel, who's the wife of Yerovam ben Nevat, Chotei Umachti Yisrael, that Izebel was a Phoenician princess, and she brought Baal worship to Eretz
She's the wife of
Yisrael.
Achab. She's the wife of Achab.
Achab, thank you. I'm glad you're here. Achab, why did I say Yerovam?
You said Yerovam, yeah. You started the evil.
Good. So neither of them are good guys, and introduced Baal worship to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, now that was Perek Chavav. Perek Chav Zayin, unusual Perek. We did it last week. Tsar is compared to the ultimate luxury container ship, made of the finest materials, inlaid boxwood, ivory, marble, etc., and it's laden with goods from a vast geographic, widespread network of trade partners. Last week, I took my Steinsaltz English Navi and I highlighted the names of the trade partners. We also used maps, which I'll send you for the Shiur, which showed who they were and what they traded in. We counted up 35 trade partners going as far as Spain. And we also counted that there were approximately 45 products or categories of products. And these categories could have included literally hundreds, if not thousands of goods, because it says every type of precious stone. How many types of precious stones are there? The answer is a lot. Now, when all of a sudden, out of the blue sky, this luxury trade ship sinks like a stone to the bottom of the oceans, all the trade partners stop what they're doing on land, and they do this famous shrika, this whistle in astonishment. How did this happen? Very much as we describe a shrika of the enemies of the Jewish people do, is how did this nation, God's favorite nation, fall so low? And it's also astonishing because shipbuilding is attributed to Tyre. Tyre invented the ship. And that was Perek Chav Zayin. Now this week we're on Perek Chav Ches. What's Perek Chav Ches about? We've given a lot of ink, 78 psukim to a little known, little mentioned nation. Now, before we go into the theme, we need to backtrack again, see who exactly is Tsar. And that's not really clear. I looked into the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, as all my chaverim know, the Abarbanel likes to bring up a series of questions and then answer them textually. And somebody once said that there was a person, a Yid, who came and all very well intentioned on a Friday night. He's sitting after his meal and he has a Chumash Abarbanel open and he's reading the questions, and every week falls asleep before he gets to the answers. And he says, Abarbanel must be one heck of an Amoritz. He says, this guy, he doesn't believe in anything. He's questioning the whole world. So we look through and we get some of his answers. He tells us, who is Tsar? He says, it's not Venice. Why Venice? He says, there are those, he says, among Amenu, among our nation, who said it's Venetia. He says Venetia, which is off Greece. And he says, yeah, it's a tempting assumption because Venice, island, sea empire, he says, but there's 1,000 years separating the beginning of Venice from Tsar we're talking about. So not going to work. He says that it's brought down that Tsar written Mole is Tsar, and Tsar written Chaser is Rome. And he says, sorry, that's not true either. He says, look in Yeshaya, look in Yechezkel, you'll see it's stuff used intermittently. So that doesn't tell us who Tsar is. Now,
Well, so
this
Star was
Eric-
gone before Rome was around.
Exactly, right. There was not much of a Rome in Yechezkel's time, right?
and so he says, nah, doesn't work.
They
for you.
also are not international traders.
So he's saying it's purported there were two separate nations. Tsar, he says, and Rome, two separate places. But like we said, they don't overlap in time. So it doesn't happen. Now, the parak is complex. It's even self-contradictory. And it centers around the nugget of Tsar, Tzadik Reish, written Chaser, Novav, and the Melech of Tsar, Tzadik Vav Reish. Now, we have a kina to the Melech of Tsar, Mole, Tzadik Vav Reish, and we have 8 psukim on that, but we have 11 psukim before that dealing with the nugget of Tsar. And then the parak goes on and devotes a couple of psukim to the destruction of Sidon, and I'll tell you the truth, nobody knows why. Sidon is very, very scantily mentioned in Zechariah Epis someplace. There's very little known about it. You know what? That's about as much as I'm going to mention about Sidon. And then we have a great deal of nechama about what's going to happen when all of this stuff is over. It's great. So the first thing I want to deal with, who is Melech Tsar, written Mole, as opposed to the nugget of Tsar, written Chaser. And I'm going to turn to Rav Adin Steinzeltz, who says it to us really, really beautifully. I'll translate it in Hebrew. Melech Tsar says, Nosaf al Gedula so ha'ishis. In addition to his personality, he says, Malach Melech Tsar al Hame'atzma. He says, the superpower, Hayamis ha'chashuva be'olam shel osozman, the greatest superpower of its day. The Kinera, Gam ha'ir ha'ashira bioser be'olam, the world's richest city. He says, Ain't makbilos rabos historia lema'amado shel Tsar. Not many people were his equal in history. And he says, he was the richest ruler in the world, and everyone was dependent upon him because he would provide them with raw material components and with finished goods that they needed to carry on their daily lives. He was the master of trade. And it says, Ha'olam ro'ebo demus mystoris. He's seen as a mysterious person. Why? Eino Yotze Uba. He doesn't go out. He doesn't come in. Eino Holech Barosh Hatzava. He doesn't lead an army. It says Ela Yoshev Lo, says Bife'ero in his splendor, Shel Ha'olam the Makom Chashai. He's in some secret place. He says in that secret place is where he sits, and pretty mysterious to the world at large. Not only that, there is a discrepancy or a debate. Did he live 500 years? Did he live 1,200 years? Because there are those who say he was a friend of Yehuda.
Whoa.
And there are those who date him to the time of David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. So apparently, he had a big life, but there's more than that. That's not all there is to it.
He lived all of it with his head on, or?
Say it again? Yeah, that Mosh, the head on happens to do with the fact of it was Mike the chicken who we talked about, who lived for 18 months after his head was cut off. And my friend David didn't believe
That's
it, had to
funny.
show it
That
to
is
him
funny.
on Google.
It's true.
So I assume that's a play on Hiram, like Yehuda, Isha Dulam, something like that, right?
Yes,
Yes.
Business partner. Yeah.
Yes.
or his,
So
actually his servants.
we're going to start.
Right.
We start with the Midrash Rabbah C. And he says, there were 13 people who did not taste the taste of death. Lo ta'amu ta'am misa. And of course, among the 13 is Hiram. Hiram is Hiram. Hiram is the Melech of Tsar. It says, Nichnas began Eden, Yotza. Nichnas, that they should tarach the binyan beis hamikdash. He entered paradise and he returned. Why did he go into it? Because he insisted in the binyan beis hamikdash. Therefore, Hoshivu also began Eden arba meo shana. He was put there for 400 years. Now this is Bracious Rabasi. He says, but Lasof niska'ed belibo. He got very proud and mighty. Yamar. El ani says, Moshev Elohim Yoshavti. I sit where God sits. I'm a God. Not a bright thing to say. Lefichach Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu LiYechezkel Emor LeNogid Tzor. I have only one problem with this. Before we talk about Melech Tzor with the Vav, now talk about Nogid Tzor Choser. So I've got an issue with this. He says, Ya'an Gova Libcha. Your heart became proud and mighty. It says, Be'eden Gan Elokim. This is a pasuk that we're going to encounter later, pasuk Yud Gimel. Lefichach Gershu Migan Eden Hu Yoshev Begehenim.
Whoa.
I still don't have a really clear picture of who he was, but I'll tell you, Yalkut Shimoni paints this incredible picture. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to tell you. The picture is a picture of him erecting in the sea Shiva Rakios, 7 firmaments. Each firmament is wider than the next. So if you can picture a structure that gets wider as it goes up, he says there were 40 columns, and each column was square. And on each column, there was a platform, a rakia. And the rakia, the first one was 500 by 500 amos, and the top one, the 7th, was 3,500 by 3,500 amos. And they were in various materials, the last one being gold. And he says there were precious stones that were hitting against each other, causing sparks and thunder and lightning. And he had his own kisei hakavod over there. He had a real enterprise going. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Yechezkel, he says to him, I want you to go up and I want you to talk to him. He says, how am I going to get there? And he says, that's my issue. Hashem flies Yechezkel up to him. So of course, he flies it up to him, and you would think that the Melech is going to get a little bit shocked and amazed that he is. He says, and he was told to tell him by the Rebbeinu Shalom, Ben Adam, son of man, Emor Lechira Melech Tzor, Ma'ata Miska Egilud Isha Ata. What do you have to be proud about? You're born from a woman like everybody else. And he says, he tells it to him, and he gets there. And he says to him, right, I was born of man, of woman, he says. But he says, Moshavo belev yamim, af ani moshvi belev yamim. God lives he's entrenched in the sea. I'm entrenched in the sea. Ma HaKadosh Baruch Hu Is Shiva Rakiyim? Afani came. God has 7 firmaments. Me too. Lo od elakam melachim mesu v'nikayam. How many kings? He says. V'chein echad yesrim melachim mimalchei beis David. Echad yesrim melachim mimalchei Yisrael. V'chamishim neviim v'asarot kohanim gdolim kovarti kulam. I don't think he means that I buried them. He means I'm alive and they all died. Banichai, he says, Hare ani hare el ani. Ani moshav Elohim yoshati kalev yamim. Yechezkel said to him, there are bigger people than you. He says, Lama yachiram domeh. What was Hiram comparable to? It says, le'eved, to a servant, she'asol levush la'adono. He made the clothing for his master. Kol zman she'hoya halevush al adono, long as the master's wearing the clothing. Ha'eved ro'ev hu miskayeh. I'm proud of my handiwork and I can see it. Otsisi zeh halevush li'adoni. I made this. Amar Adon. Ani korea halavush. Below yihiyeh ha'eved miska'eh olai. I'm going to rip it up. He says, and that slave will no longer be proud on my account. So listen to this. Kach Hiram haya miska'eh al yedei sheshalach ha'arazim lebeis hamikdash. He sent the cedars to the Beis Hamikdash. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hareini machariv es beisi. I will destroy my house. Shelo yihiyeh chiram miska'eh olai. So he won't be proud on my account. Shenemar, it says in Zechariah Yud Aleph, B'sach levanon de la Selah. Lebanon, open your doors, your cedar doors. The tolchal eish ba'arazecha. And the fire will consume your arazim. Masofo, what was the end of the Melech? Havi Kadosh Baruch Hu alav Nebuchadnezzar. And what did Nebuchadnezzar do? Bol asimo b'fanav. He raped his mother before his eyes. Horido mikiso, he took him down from his throne. He will cut him 2 fingers worth of flesh off his body every single day. Umat bilon b'chometz. Dip them in vinegar. Umachilon ad shemes misa meshuna, until he died.
Weird death.
Bad.
Sure.
You know, we have a friend, many of us know, Jeffrey Rosenberg. Jeffrey Rosenberg would say of people who would say, may he die an embarrassing death. This is an embarrassing death. And he says, but what happened to the building? Korah HaKadosh Baruch Hu es ha'aretz u'gidad zam l'tzadikim yasid lavo. God doesn't waste a good building. He says the tzadikim will get it one day. Okay, so that's now telling us what he did wrong, how he went into Gan Eden, how he did special things. I'm confused. I gotta be honest with you, I'm very confused. So let's look at the original art scroll by Rabbi Moshe Eisenman and see what he has to say. Usually very good things. What's his introduction? He says he's recorded as the ruler during the years of Nebuchadnezzar's siege. The Chachamim, Bereshis Rabbah, identified this king as Hiram, who befriended David and Shlomo, and accordingly he lived close to 500 years. Another opinion in the Medrash identifies him with Hiram, the friend of Yehuda in Bereshis Lamed Ches Aleph. According to this pasuk, he lived approximately 1,200 years. Yechezkel is to take up a kinna, a lamentation for this great king. And just for this king, there was much for Yechezkel to lament. Well, why? There have been so much to hope for. You have to understand that this Goyish king praised the Ribbono Shalom And it was a public outcry, and people heard this. Then he opened up his hands and he opened up his pocketbook and gave to the creation of Beis Hamikdash. So he concludes by saying the enormity of his accomplishments crazed him and deluded him into self-deification, where before he had been inspired by the recognition of God of Israel, who created heaven and earth, his glance now turned only towards himself. And in preposterous myopia, nearsightedness, he saw only his own wealth and power. Okay, so it seems that we are talking about one person who went bad. Now, we have Nogid as a successor to Melech. Rabbi Dr. Breuer says the obsession of Hiram's successor, he's talking about two different people, with his own glory robbed him of the last trace of the spirit implied by the word Nagid. Okay, now we see one person, two people. Is this the same person? So the first thing I'm going to do is direct you to Mahari Kra. The Mahari Kra says, if you look in the Mikros Gedolos Chav Ches, it's on page 456 in the Art Scroll. First column, he says, L'nagid Tsar. He says, L'melech Tsar. Not only that, Chomas Adach says, Mahari Kra says it. And not only that, other people say that the Nagid is the Melech, but they all seem to be based on the Mahari Kra. So I ask you, who's the Mahari Kra? Anybody know? I'm sure Rabbi Yeager knows who Mahari Kra is.
It's not Rabbi Yosef Karo, is it? No.
Is Rav Yosef Kara, not Rav Yosef Karo, but
I'm
Rav
not sure.
Yosef
It's funny. I saw
Kara.
him quoted something. I'm not sure who it is.
So in any event, I'll give you just the briefest outline, because what we also do is we try to use some of the poskim, some of the mefarshim, and tell us, learn a little bit about him. He lived between 1060 and 1130. And bottom line is he was Talmud of Rashi. Now he's the Talmud of Rashi. He transcribed a lot of Rashi, and they say sometimes the line is a little blurry. We don't know how much of the Mahari Kara is Rashi, how much of Rashi is the Mahari Kara. But he was close to him. He was a student of his. Not only that, he says Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam, mentions Mahari Kara in his commentaries. Apparently, the Rashbam was greatly influenced by his exegetical approach. Now, we don't know if he wrote a continuous commentary on the Torah. Maybe he wrote only interpretations of dozens of individual verses. Now, he composed a commentary to most of the books of Nevi'im, Rishonim, and that's his most significant work. Although he has not received the exposure he deserves, there's no doubt that his interpretive approach influenced the exegetes of his time, including the Chor Shor, Rashbam, Radak, Ralbach. This is a big guy. So bottom line is, Mahari Kra says something, listen to him. So he says, Nagid equals Melech. Now, the Malbim does something very, very strange. He says, Harab Yitzchak Barbanel says, Shehanogid Tsar Eino Melech Tsar. The prince of Tsar, the Nogid Tsar, is not the Melech of Tsar. But then he says, Shehanogid hu pakid al inyanei hamadina. He was an appointee. He was a hired hand on the nation on certain matters. Umelech u'inen acher. The strange part is he says, V'da'ati bazeh tishama acharze. Guess what? I read all of his words and he never talks about it. He does not talk about what his opinion is of what goes on. So that's what so might as well at this point in time look at, as I told my good friend David, that the Abarbanel, what does he say? What, Naomi?
Is it not good in Melech? And it came up with Barbanel and Yechezkel.
She says, Nagid and Melech. My wife looked it up online. Says, comes with, look up Yechezkel and you'll see.
Oh,
Barbanel and
Oh,
Yechezkel.
28:1.
Let me tell you what he says. The Barbanel, my dear friend Marvin Schenker once said, it's impossible to learn a pasuk of Navi without the Barbanel. He's pretty much right. The Barbanel, number one, he was Lianias Dati, very strong-willed. And I'm saying this in a very positive way. He was strong-willed. And he was strong-willed, and he was not afraid to buck heads with anybody, tell anybody that they were wrong. And if you look at the life he lived and what he did and who sought after him, you get to understand it. We've talked about the Barbanel before. So look what he says. Kfar hodaticha das hameforshim shenagid umelech in davar echad. The one thing. Ba'asafek sheyikre lahem bazeh shetiyeh achas mehen lo tzarach. Then why do I need both terms?
Right.
They're the same thing. Why am I switching terminology? V'yikshe gam kein shinui hashemos b'makom acher. Yetezeh amarti lemala. Shebimei David u'Shlomo hoya melech al tzar v'yachar kach husar. Listen to this. Hamitznefes v'atorah. We're comparing it to the levush of the Kohen Gadol. So this melech, his glory, his crown was removed. They didn't want a king because he lost. So what did they do? They took, just like he says, kasher asu haromaim. They took a prince, a nugget. He says, Bisman ha-nugget bo Nebuchadnezzar lekovsha. He says, and he was very successful, and he conquered the nation. Then the people of Tsar, who fell to Nebuchadnezzar, that the nugget was not strong enough to help them, they went back to the sea kingdom, and then they put a melech over them. He says, melech shilachem milchamosehem, a king who will fight their battles. Ubizman hamelech, but Alexander's Mogadon comes Alexander of Macedonia. He says, the hechrev chorban hechlati asar. Then he wiped it out. Diptizeh, achareishes hiperakaso shtei hachorbanos hamiflalos shaba'u al tsar. After he took about these two great destructions, Zachar hanevuos shaba'u navi. Now we're mentioning the prophecies that came to the Navi. Im al hanogid shelahem bisman shoya moshel nogid who b'chorban rishon im hanavua shebiasu al melech shahaya molech b'tzur bisman hachurban hasheni. Two different people, two different kinds, two different leaders. I saw someplace said that the nogid was a paid employee who was selected by approbation, paid to take a, he was like a paid marshal. He was a boss, and they hired him. So that is what the Abarbanel says. So still, we got a lot of conflicts over here. So I'll tell you, there's a parish called the Mincha Gedola. And the Mincha Gedola is a big, big chassid of the Abarbanel. But then he says, Lianias Dati. Whenever he says Lianias Dati, I don't really agree. But he says something very good. He brings you a pshara. He brings you a compliment. He says, Tsar had a nugget, Tsar had a melech. Hanogid hu haya mimuneh al kol haschoros hasocharim. He was in charge of business. After all, it was a commercial nation. He says, Yal kol anshe ha'aniyos, all the sailors, all the merchants. He says, Haba'os l'tzar, v'hu hanikra biyamenu hayom, council. Call him a council. v'hayu mimanim hayoser chacham sheyimtzu ba'ir al zeh. Meritocracy. Give it to the guy with the biggest brain, and he'll run the business aspect. La melech hamolech al kol haaretz ba'u shtei hanevuos ha'ela kenegdam. The katon says Hechel. Who was the smaller of them? The one who was the hired hand. That was the nugget. So we begin with that nevuah. He says, "V'nibe rishono nagid tsar." Then later on, he talks about the Melech of Tsar. And he says something else. He says, why do we start the nugget and then talk about a Melech? You know why? Because we want to humiliate him. We want to humiliate the king, the ruler. He says, he's really the same person, says the Mincha Gedola. He says, we want to talk about him first as he's a nothing. Then we're going to glorify him, as you'll see, into what a great person he was and where he winds up. So it's all done to cut him down to sus. Says Mincha Gedola. It's not a big parish. Okay, let's talk about the structure. If you look at the Dot Mikra tells you very
So
succinctly.
the king is sort of demoted to like a secretary of commerce or something like that, or chief operating officer.
The
It's the same guy, right?
The people hired a chief operating officer.
Right.
Hired a chief operating officer. And the king, he's in charge of the whole country. But somehow or other, which is why I like what the Abarbanel says a lot better than Mincha Gedola. The Mincha Gedola says that when we are calling the king a nugget, we're calling him, you're just a hired hand. You're no great shape.
It's just a derogatory appellation.
Yes, derogatory appellation,
Right.
but it becomes more derogatory when later on we refer to him as a melech. Look at what you were,
Right.
and look at how you fell.
Got it.
So he says over here, the four sections of this nevuah. He says there are first, gavaso shel nagid soru mafalto. How haughty he was. And second, gidulaso cheto upapolaso. The greatness, the sin, and the downfall of the Melech. Then third, we have Tzidon. Really, they say it really belongs in Perek Chaf Hey with minor nevuos on minor nations. Doesn't really belong here. It should have been there. And then you have Divrei Nechama, what happened after Kibbutz Goliath. Okay. So, looking at that, what are Psukim Aleph through Yud? Aleph through Yud, talking about the Nagid, he says, of Tsar written Chaser, he says, it is a state of unbridled arrogance. Now, Rabbi Eliezer Nebal Gonse says on Psukim Beis, Gimel, and Dalet, and I'll read them. Ben Adam and Marla Nagid Tsar, tell him, Komar Hashem Elokim, Hashem Elokim, Ya'an Goval Libcha. Your heart became so mighty. Vatomer, Kel Ani, I'm God, I'm a God. Moshav Elohim, I sit where God sits. Yoshati B'Lev Yamim, I sit in the heart of the sea. V'ata Adam, says God, you are a man. Below Kel, V'titein Libcha Kalev Elohim, Bitmiya, are you going to make your heart like the heart of God? He does it, it's Pasuk Gimel. Ine Chachamata mi Daniel, says, are you smarter than Daniel? So the question is, what's the reference to Daniel? And it says in Rashi in Pasuk Gimel, it says, Daniel came to Nebuchadnezzar, and he interpreted his dream. And Nebuchadnezzar wanted to worship him. He wanted to bring karbanos. and he wouldn't take it because Daniel is smart enough to know every bit of knowledge he has comes from the Boner Shalom. He says, are you? He says, like Daniel? And then he says, Kol sasum lo omamucha? He said, has anything secret been revealed to you? Bitmiya and Pasuk Daled. B'chachmascha, b'tfunascha, asiselecha chayil? Question mark. If that's now, is it your brilliance? He says they became so strong. He says ta'as zahav v'chesev yotzro secha. He says you made money and you bought your position and your power. And there's a great perush over here that says bata'as zahav v'chesev. He said perhaps he knew alchemy to turn lead into gold. Beautiful, beautiful little parish brought in over there. Okay. Or you bought your power through commerce. And you know what the word for commerce is? It's a rachil. You know what rachil is? A peddler. It says you're nothing more than a peddler. That's all you are. Then we take a look at what happened. Zion, Lachain, Mevi Alecha Zorim, Aritzi Goyim. Big Bulvan Goyim are coming for you. The Heriku Charbel sung, they will unsheathe their swords. Rashi says on that pasuk, he says, Midrash Haggadah, Bishkav Zachar. They sodomized him. That's how much respect they had for him. He says, how? Kishen Nival Kinashim. He says, the way that a woman is you have sexual congress with a woman. So that's what was done to him in Pasuk Zion. And he says in the end, the very end, we go through only selected psukim, Pasuk Yud, Mose Are Lim Tamus Biyad Zorim. Mose Are Lim. Metzudas David says, Are Lev. What did we say in Yeshaya? Shem will be moles levavchem. We say in the Torah that God should circumcise your hearts to allow Hashem in. And he says, your heart was not circumcised. He says, and that's the way you're going to die. Very embarrassing death.
Arlas levavecha is the phrase.
Arlas
Arlas levavecha.
So then we have the next Psukim Yud through Yutes, and I say it's a fall worthy of Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost. It talks about an angel. An angel? Sakina al melech tzor amarta lo ko amar Hashem Elokim ata chosem tachnis molei chachma uchlil yofi. I'm going to stop right there. Khalil Yofi, you are the ultimate of perfection. Did we not say last week when Sor referred to itself as Kalilas Yofi? That's a term that's reserved for Yerushalayim, the pinnacle of perfection and beauty. And here God says that's who you were? Like I say, the fall from paradise. You were a big guy. You were a learned guy. You were a devout guy. You proclaimed God from the rooftops. And he said, now, so if you look at Pasuk Yud Gimel in this section, it says, Be'eden gan Elohim ha'yisa, kol even yikara musa chasecha. You were covered, you were with every precious stone. And he says, Odem, Pitida, Yahalom, Tarshish, Shoam, Yashpe, Sapir. Wait a second. It's not exact, but it sounds a lot like the Avnei Shoam. It sounds a lot like the Kohen Gadol over here. It says, Uberakas, and shining burnished gold. But then there's something that nobody really explains well. There's not a bad job in the Art Scroll English on this. He says, Melechas tu pecha, drums, Unikavecha bach biyom baracha konanu. We're talking about a being who's compared to precious stones, cherubim, angels, and then you're talking about as being a bag of wind, and you talk about his orifices. There was only one way that I could find to explain this, and that way is our favorite Makubal, the Ramad Vali. What does Ramad Vali say? He says, Kol Evan Yikara Misucha Seich, that covers you, Odem, Pitida, Yalom, Tarshish, Shem, Shoham, V'yashpeh, Sapir, Nofach, Ubarakis, Zahav, Ki Elu Ha'asara Dvarim, these 10 things, Hayikarim, that are precious, in Keneged Ha'eser Dargin Shel Hamalchus. Now remember, we're talking about 7 spheros, Malchus being the highest of the spheros. These are the categories of the 7th highest rung. And he says, but then how does it resolve Meleches Tapi, let me just get the correct pronunciation, Tupecha, your drums. Gan his minlo, God, says Ramad Vali, Nashim Yafos, Haru Yoslo. God brought him women, Lehis Daveg, Lehis Anegomayam, to enjoy them. This was his reward in Gan Eden, where he spent 400 years. Below Tov Hayu Ha'adam Levado, because God said it's not good for a man to be by himself. Ukvar Yadua, Shakol Zachar, the Ridito Lamata, every human male who goes below Misharasho, from his source, Ha'elyon, from his elevated high source, Yoredes Nukvaso Imo. Take that for what it means. He says, Kemosha Hayala Adam Harishon. And when it's written, B'nikavecha Bayom Hibaracha Konanu, Gam Yesh Lefarsho Ala Shiva Nikavim Ha'elyonim, Shem Shiva Sha'arim B'nefesh. Now, I told you guys, I understand, even though I can read and translate 3 out of every 30 words that the Ramad says, but he's clearly telling me there are spheres and celestial realms, and these things are referring to a celestial reward for this king in Gan Eden. That's what we're talking about. And then he says, everything was in harmony, everything was good. V'zeh gormu b'loshon hakononius she'amara kasuv b'yom hibaracha konenu. That's what that loshon is talking about. He says, the kiluso is praise, nefach lekelas, to mockery. It says l'basof, in the end, that they gavoso, because of his excessive pride. Ki lachein hayu lahutim acharav lemishchav zachor. Comes down to the same thing. In the end, he's going to be seduced and he will be completely degraded. B'mash and nisga'eh, the way that he was mighty, niskales. He says he is mocked, and nischalel, and he is profaned. We're going to basically gloss very quickly, because we've been doing this for a while. And we're going to say, he continues to talk about Yudat Ator Kuruv Bimshach Hasochech. He says, you're a cherub, a sheltering cherub. Pasuk Tesav, Tanimata B'drachecha, Miyom Yibaracha, Ad Nimsa Avlo Sabach, till you showed your fatal flaw, says you were angelic. And he says, what's it? The ro rechula sacha, in the abundance of your commerce, malu tochecha chamas. You became filled with extortion and corruption, and you sinned. Vahalelecha mehar Elohim va'abedecha kiruv hasochech mitoch avnei eish. He says, and I will take you down in a fiery way. You will be demoted. Yud Zayin, gava libcha b'yafyecha. You became proud of your beauty. He says, Shichata chachmasecha, and your wisdom, al yifasecha. He says, what do? Al eretz hishlachticha, I'm throwing you to the ground. L'fnei malachim nisaticha l'ra'avach. I'm going to send you down, he says, so the kings lehistakel b'boshdecha, says Rashi, to look at your embarrassment. L'rava kamo l're'iyah, to look at you. You can spell Ra'ava a different way, and you can say to sodomize you, which would go along with the theme. And he says, you're going to be like sand on the ground, dust on the ground to all who look at you. And all, he says, the nations who knew you, shamamu alecha. It'll be tamahu. They will be amazed. They'll be shocked. What became of you? Balahos vayisa eincha ad olam. Till you no longer exist. That's really the essence of the parak. I told you, Sidon is thrown in, and we have a little glimpse at the end, and it's really lovely, of how good and secure we will be after all this is over. When God is our protector, we're back at Eretz Yisrael. We're heading in that direction, but we're not yet there. We have more nations to be cursed. We have more nations to be punished. We have discussions about Gog Magog. We have the construction of Bayis Shlishi. There's a lot to be done in the Sefer. Baruch Hashem, Ad Kan, Perek Chavches.
Quick question. The Barbanel that you read pointed to Alexander Mogdon as capturing. Does that fit with the chronology of time as to when Alexander the Great lived? That's okay, right? So
it does fit with the chronology of time, because the question that I alluded to last week was Tsar completely destroyed? And they said Alexander Mogdon destroyed them and then built the bridge to them for his own use. He came later. He was the last.
So it fits with his context. The last point I was going to make is the nukva always refers to the feminine counterpart of the soul. I heard someplace, I don't know the source, Olam Haba, we all spend time with our nukva. So the husband and wife, so that's eternal. And what he's doing here, she goes down with him. It makes sense with that idea.
Yeah.
She goes down with him.
If you haven't ever explored his forum, the Ramat Bali is from the base Medrash, is a Talmud Chaver of the Ramchal. And like I said, 3 out of 30 words. I can, maybe I can read them. Doesn't mean I'm going to understand.
It's abstract. Is it 7 spheres, 10 spheres, etc.? That's another thing. And it was amazing. Thank you for the privilege to join.
Thank you for being
I
here.
will join wherever I can. And this is amazing. I didn't have the full background in it, but thank you for the synopsis of the 3 programs.
My pleasure. Everybody, all my chaverim, seien wir gesund. Chodesh Tov, we're in a new Chodesh.
Right.
And all the neshamas that we spoke about should have an Elias neshama. And everybody should be well.
Shkoyach.
See you tomorrow.
Laila
See
Tov.
you tomorrow, Richard. Nu Masechta.
Yep, I got it prepared already.
Excellent.